direct contact with the national focal point is what I always aim for in order to get accurate, real-time information of what the procedures in place are and if they would apply sometimes. So that's my kind of gold standard, as it were. But it's not always possible in all cases. And so government ministry websites or online resources that provide the actual laws or regulations are also hugely important. In terms of the project, and it stems from what we've generated as well internally as resources, but consistent information that you can just pop into any application, quickly, things like project descriptions, your intent, use of the data, things like that. If that's all as easily set out as possible, it will make applying for ABS access as efficient as possible from your end. We have something like this. We've drafted a template letter, basically, that we ask projects and researchers to fill out when there aren't procedures in place. So for many countries, there could be application forms or similar, in which case, great, we just put that information into those formats. But if there isn't, then we use something that we've generated internally. Because we centralize the process, we do find that this is great for legal certainty. We have a lot of staff, and if we left it to each individual program or project, it could be a lot of disconnect all at once, and it is a tricky subject area. So we do think this is a real benefit for us, but if it's not possible, consensus on what the understanding is and what you're looking for in order to be able to say, yes, we're confident that these materials have been accessed compliantly, then that would work equally well, I think. And lastly, forming networks with organizations that you're going to be collaborating with, and obviously more importantly, possibly the authorities and national focal points in the countries, as you're doing with these calls, is can be invaluable, I think, to your projects, that they have an awareness already of the project, what the aims are, and that the effort that's gone into already building those relationships. Lastly, I just mentioned digital sequence information. It may be familiar to most of you or not. There are ongoing discussions that will hopefully culminate this year in a decision on whether digital sequence information or data, genomic information, would be considered a genetic resource and as such possibly addressed in a similar or the same way as resources physically. And I think working with your own governments to learn of the position on that from the country is the best way to get an idea of what this would mean for the project and for your own organizations as well. And that is everything that I had, but thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I really look forward to the discussion. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine, for that very hello. Yeah, I was saying thank you so much for the stimulating presentation, and we hope that the participants will be able to bring out the comments and discussions that will make us to harmonize this presentation with respect to the goals of the AfricaBP, like I earlier said. I think I'm not seeing any comments on the chat box, but before I open the floor for questions, I would like to quickly, please just ask you to, in the introductory slides, I think the second slide, where you were talking about the scope of the Nagoya Protocol, and I wanted to know, is there any specific definition of the associated traditional knowledge for the purpose of utilization? Do you have any standard definition of what constitutes associated traditional knowledge? Maybe to just say that why I'm asking that question is so that in terms of the utilization, where you may need to use maybe for herbal medicine, for example, and then where you need to use for food and all that. So do you have a standard? And then going further than that, it is, some people feel that the benefits that is supposed to be envisioned by the Nagoya Protocol remain unfulfilled. And for some stakeholders have that opinion, and many local communities. What will be or how will you advise the African BP in respect of achieving our goals of achieving this maximum use among the African national focal points? How will you advise?
Yes,
I think maybe when you start with that, then we can take further comments and questions.
Absolutely, yeah. I can answer your first bit, but I might have to ask you to repeat your last question around the traditional knowledge. Sorry, but I'll come back to you in a second. In terms of defining traditional knowledge, I think it's considered that it's better defined within the country of origin because it will differ, and there are different interests depending on Indigenous peoples, local communities within that particular country. So I would say look to the legal documentation, laws, regulations, measures in place within whatever country you're dealing with to get a clear definition. There is a definition that has been put together for guidance purposes by the UK, and I can put that in the chat, but I think it's best defined by the country that you're dealing with. And sorry, can I ask you to repeat your last question?
Yeah, my last question was, there are a lot of opinions on the benefits that is envisioned by the Nagoya Protocol. Mm-hmm. And many stakeholders feel that the maximum benefits are not fulfilling. And I was asking, how will you advise the African BP? Because one of our goals in African BP is to make sure that these benefits are maximally accessed by the African communities. Mm-hmm. So how will you advise us with respect to that fear?
Yeah. I think in the non-commercial sector, we're a little bit restricted as to what we can provide in terms of benefits for the whole country. Capacity building has got a different meaning than it would have if it was in the commercial sector, where monetary benefit sharing would be able to go a long way to help with that. I think what we can bring, and projects like yourself can bring, is looking at what benefit sharing would mean to the country and your African partners on a long-term scale. I think at the minute, every access negotiation is done by a short-term project basis, or a couple of years, or a permitting type life cycle. And although the types of things that we see are long-term, like publication rights, things like that, I think if I understand correctly, the data that you will be generating, you want to really make an impact in the countries that you're working with. I would work with the governments and ministries or communities, if you're accessing from them, to really get a sense of where that information can make the biggest difference on a long-term scale, and almost consider the benefit sharing aspect beyond the life cycle of the project. I know that's difficult, that's harder, easier said than done, but
I think you're on mute, Emmanuel. Now you're on mute again.
Sorry. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Catherine. I did come towards the end of your talk, so there's a chance I missed quite a lot of bit of it. So the first thing is, could you please send us your slides if that's okay with you? Okay. Then so we can share it with the community. Then secondly, I wasn't quite sure if you may already have talked about this in your talk, but how does the Darwin Tree of Life, which I think you, of course, working at the Sangha, then there's the Sangha Tree of Life, and how does the Sangha Tree of Life, like Darwin Tree of Life, go about the ABS processes? Because I don't know if it's quite an issue within the UK, right? So,
yes, yes. So the Darwin Tree of Life and projects under the Tree of Life, we centralize them in the same way. So essentially, we address every sample set according to what the country of origin is for that material, and whether there are applicable ABS measures and procedures that we need to complete before we get it in. Everything that we do across site is prior to obviously receiving it, because access is part of it, not just utilization. But we do it case by case. Yes, you're completely right. A lot of the samples that come in for Darwin and some of the projects we're doing at the minute are primarily the UK and Europe. We have had occasions for some of our other projects, like the aquatic symbiosis genomics project. They're quite global, and so we have done this or are in the process of completing ABS actions for some of those that have fallen into scope of the national legislation. Yeah, it's the biggest impact is time. Other than that, it's just one more process. It's definitely not really any other issue than that, to be honest. And I think, and I would hope that because of the traction and the awareness this has got at the minute, grant funders and things like that will take into account the regulatory requirements these projects have to go through to be able to even begin. And so I would hope that that's reflected in the setup of projects like this in the future, so that it's not considered something that is taking time away, it's part of the project itself.
So in your role, basically, currently, what's the biggest challenge you've seen implementing or ensuring compliance, especially when it relates to the ABS? So I don't know, you may already have talked about this, but
implementing.
For the compliance aspect of things. Yeah.
I think I would say the two biggest things, or maybe one leads to the other. There's a lot of different interpretations of what user obligations are, and I think even within that, there's a little bit of confusion around UK and EU obligations and how that actually fits into global ABS. And so a lot of my time when we first start negotiate projects with people internally and externally, and that's the UK and elsewhere, is us getting onto the same page about what access and benefit sharing is and what we were required to do, and what the roles and responsibilities are around that, before we can actually then work to comply. So I think that's probably a challenge that I still see quite a bit. And I think it used to be just unawareness of it, but now I think it's multiple interpretations that almost make it more difficult, to be honest. So I'd say, I think probably that's the biggest challenge at the minute. And I think the other challenge is just conflicting information and legal certainty with some countries. It's quite difficult to get a sense of what's written down is actually in practice. And I know that resources is an issue, and I would say that's on both sides, actually, provider and user. So I think that's across the board.
So do you see a silver bullet?
Say again, sorry.
Do you see a silver bullet?
I think, honestly, I think it would be resource. As I say, it would be on both sides. It would be enough resource on the provider side to implement what they want to implement effectively, and there would be enough resource on the user side to be able to allocate the time and resource to do it as quickly as possible. Because, like I say, I think time is the biggest thing, less so what it actually is and what it entails. So yeah.
Okay. I can't see any questions in the chat box. And there is no hand that is raised.
I think Anne is raising
Okay,
a hand.
there is a question here. So what is from Dr. Gian Fikri Mariam? He says that what is the status of EU regulation on ABS on your institution? And he goes ahead to say, meaning, does the EU regulation on ABS still applicable to your institution since Britain exists within the EU?
Yes, yeah, I just saw that. Thank you. So the EU regulation, you're quite right, we have since left the EU, but the UK has essentially transposed the EU regulation into UK law. So effectively, it's the same. It's just called the UK ABS regulation now.
Okay. Any other question or comments, please?
Yes, Prof. I had a question.
Okay, go ahead, Prof.
Yes, so my question, thank you very much, Catherine. Unfortunately, my video is not working today, but I was going to ask, I'm very interested in how you manage to navigate materials from third parties and how you go about reporting these materials, especially when the said countries where the original materials came from might not be aware of its existence. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, it is trickier because but there are a fair few countries now that include the scope within their scope of access and genetic resource and everything, include ex situ. So that's how we link getting something from a third party, whether it's a collection or collaborator, and we can therefore compare that situation almost to the ABS legislation within that country of origin. And we would always therefore be able to follow a procedure if that is there. In terms of uncertainty, I would directly contact the NFP and get clarity on how they address the access of material in that way. Some countries have addressed it, as I say, with the use of ex situ in their procedures. Some haven't, but they can advise whether they would consider it to be needing to go through ABS or not. I think more broadly, it is a concern for, I suppose, us as users, but also I think collections, because it means that the materials that they wish to have openly available for scientists and researchers to use, it brings into question the ability to do so. So it is difficult having those conversations because their access may have been absolutely fine because they're not using it for research. They're using it to just as a collection, taxonomy or to store, which many laws exclude. But it's the downward use for research is where it kicks in and where it becomes applicable. So that helps a bit.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see another hand from Professor Julian. Can you go ahead, please?
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. And thanks, Catherine, for a very nice presentation, though I didn't get a major part of your presentation due to network issues, which I'm having here. But please, I would like you to explain how your organization rewards indigenous knowledge, adequately.
Yeah, to be honest, it's not something that we access or haven't accessed to date. So although our procedures are set up to include it in the same way, we just don't access indigenous knowledge or species that may have indigenous knowledge. We're quite, because of the areas of work that we do at the minute, a lot of, I would say 65% of our access is around pathogens and parasites, microbes, human health, organisms, things like that we access globally. And more broadly, because our purposes are usually around sequencing and generating data, and probably a little bit less so towards anything that's going to generate a product, or hasn't really got any intent for it to be commercial in the future. So it just, in terms of our research aims, just mean that we don't drift into that area. Sorry, I can't provide more help with that.
I can see there is another question on the chat box. What is your institution position or opinion regarding the modalities and options to regulate and sharing of benefit regarding the issue of DSI and associated information and data?
Yes. So our institute's position is that we need open access data. It's effectively how we operate. We generate it and access it, and so we would champion measures that separate access from benefit sharing. So I think that leads us to options a little bit lower down the scale of those 6. But I'm very happy to talk about that in more detail outside, if you like, and see if we can agree on what might be possible and what might not.
Okay, there is another question from Dr. Laitan. Based on your experience navigating ABS across the local authorities in partner countries, how would you recommend, how would you recommend the AfricaBP approach on ABS issues, sourcing samples from various sites across Africa? Would dealing directly with the NFPs of countries would be an effective approach?
Yes. It's definitely the first approach that comes to mind. But I think if you're in a position where you can agree measures with multiple NFPs regarding this one project, I think that would be a fantastic way forward. I'm unsure of the feasibility of that. I think it would depend on maybe how comfortable the countries that you are working in are with ABS, and how comfortable they are with the project, and of course the resources that you'll be accessing. But I think we are at a point in time, certainly over the last 3 years, I have seen a slight shift from the specificity of permitting documentation to a little bit more of a shift to broader permission. And that's not to say unrestricted permission, it's just broader for either in a timescale sense or a volume of resources sense, if they're the same species perhaps, or a ring-fenced species set, and frameworks of projects. So I think it's definitely possible. And I think this sort of meeting that you're having NFPs coming to is probably the best way to begin making those connections, and making that effort towards getting a consensus on how much benefit the African population will be from this project. I'd be very interested to see if it's possible.
Okay, thank you. There's still a question. How do you monitor? I think that's from Dr. Tangot. How do you monitor if your research effort will be commercial?
Yeah. So as I say, we're non-commercial. Any projects that we set up at the Institute has a non-commercial project aim. So yes, of course, we generate data and we put it open access. And so there's always the possibility that people will access that data for commercial intent. That's kind of out of our hands. But any application that we put in, we have a statement that says this application is for non-commercial use, and whatever we access under this permitting, under subsequent permitting documentation, will be as intended for non-commercial intent and research. However, should that intent change, and I should stress, whether it changes at all, whether it could be still non-commercial or it could change to commercial, we will get back in touch to renegotiate. And actually, typically that's a term or a condition of lots of agreements that are in place for ABS. They always state that should something change from the intended research or project or anything like that, you have to renegotiate or get back in touch to request permission to do that.
Okay, we still have a question from Justin. How does your institute, that's Sangha, ensure ABS compliance? Is there any checklist? Is there any checklist that is used for this purpose? That's from Dr. Justin.
Yeah, so we essentially ensure compliance by centralizing it through one process. So it's internal policy and procedure that should somebody wish to access non-human materials that could be a genetic resource, they have to register that with us essentially, and get in contact with us. And we record that, and we ensure that we can either evidence that ABS compliance is not required, or we then go through the procedure as we need to. So we hinge on the fact that it's internal policy and procedure, and we just build it into processes around research at the Institute so that we capture those that would be applicable here. In terms of checklist, we have internal documentation that gives support and advice and guidance and all that sort of thing. It's less so a checklist because it's a little bit more complex sometimes. As I say, each country's laws can differ very slightly, either on what they consider to be a resource or what they consider to be access. And so it's a little bit more involved of pretty much comparing the situation to the legislation that's in place. But as I say, the internal documentation we have, the procedure that we have in place, and myself and us as a support function basically ensure compliance, or enable compliance, I should say. We enable it. We can't be accountable for absolutely everything, but yes, that's how we do it.
Okay, thank you. I still have two questions, and I hope our time will be able to accommodate that. Still from Dr. Fikri Mariam. It says, if your position supports open access model, do you think that there will be fair and equitable sharing of benefits that possibly arises from its use? And then his final question. Since developed and developing countries do not have equal capacity to generate and use DIS, what is your opinion to leverage technological, and capacity or capability gaps?
They're hard questions. That's unfair. For the first one, in terms of how we can ensure benefit sharing if access is open, I think there are mechanisms that may be possible at the stage of those benefits being realized. So not just commercial, but even non-commercial, whether that's, at the point of publication or something. I think the information that comes from those research projects, speaking probably specifically from our kind of experience, where that's a lot of the data is a lot of our benefit, and the publications, I think there could be something put in place at that level to make sure that that data goes directly back to the country and directly back to ministries or communities that's going to help with. I know that's not necessarily in place now or considered in that way, but I have been trying to think of better ways that we can work with countries to actually get the benefits that they want across, almost, to not just see it as a reporting obligation or something like that, but to actually have a bit more of a collaborative sharing of benefits, if that makes sense. So if I was in an ideal world, I would maybe say that we could find solutions when the benefits arise, you know, when information and knowledge and results do actually come out of the use of those benefits. I know it might not be possible, but that'd be my opinion. And then the second one, okay, yes, capacity building. This one's a bit harder for me, I think, because I completely agree. There is an unequal capacity to generate and use DSI. I think a lot of the collaborations that we do and actually have always done does build in a certain amount of either funding or financial capacity, but as you say, purely for the purpose of enabling sequencing to generate DSI or informatics expertise to then use DSI. So I think we're in a better position than some. But unfortunately, the non-commercial sector is quite tight with the monetary availability to do anything of great scale. And so I think that one will take some more thought. And whether the global fund could actually go towards something like that, I don't know. But yeah, that's a difficult one. Sorry, that's probably not a very concrete answer.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for the responses. I can't
really
see any hand up or any question on the chat box. And I would like to, on behalf of AfricaBP, appreciate you for a very wonderful presentation. Your presentation has really assisted in our knowledge of the Nagoya Protocol and the compliance and regulatory. Oh, as I was talking, I just saw a hand. I don't know. We can quickly take that so that let it be the last question or comment. From Godwin. Godwin, the floor is for you. Can you unmute and ask your question or comment?
Oh, he said it was a mistake.
Oh, okay, okay.
So just before we go, Emmanuel, I think it is important we talk about just announce re-announce the meeting next month with the UNEP CBD. The head of the Nagoya Protocol Unit. So we'll also be sending a reminder again.
Reminders. It's coming up on the 16th
of June.
And we appreciate you. We also like to appreciate you, Catherine, for permitting us to live stream this presentation. Yeah. So I think
my pleasure.
Yeah. So I'm posting the poster on the chat box so people can just, so people can just because we needed to do this live stream ahead of that because kind of test how this also works as well. Well, I can say it works fine on the social media.
It is. So thank you. In the absence of any comments, I would like to appreciate you once more and thank all those that were able to join us. We look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much. And
very
bye.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.